Welcome to this unabridged production of The Last Heroes, a Stellaris story, narrated by the author Macavity116. This is a work of fanfiction based on the video games Stellaris, Homeworld 2, and XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. Stellaris is the property of Paradox Interactive. Homeworld was originally developed by Relic Entertainment and Sierra Studios and is presently owned by Gearbox Software. XCOM is owned by Take-Two Interactive and developed by Firaxis Games. Prologue: A Parting of the Ways. November 9th, 2085. Bannack, Montana. A foreboding chill settled over the mountains of western Montana. It was early morning, and the sun wasn't going to rise for a few more hours. The only movement was in the sky, where a shiny point of light grew brighter as it approached. With a roar of engines, the flying object arrived on the scene. The super-modern space plane throttled down its engines and began to fly in lower and lower circles above a valley where Grasshopper Creek wound its way between two hills. There was no sign of civilization below, save for a simple dirt road that wound and twisted in an effort to follow the water. Much like the rest of the region, the surrounding hills were devoid of forest. Patchy groves of thickets of trees presented themselves here or there, but none were in a place that could have impeded a landing. The two sets of vertical landing thrusters brought the space plane down to a pinpoint landing atop one of those bald hills. The boarding ramp barely finished lowering into place before a blonde-haired man raced away from the ship. The man charged down the hill and came into Bannack, a ghost town that had gone without inhabitants for 100 years by this point. While many of the structures were crumbled into ruin, a single building remained in what could be passed off as a decent shape. It was the entrance to one of the many mines that were bored into the hills surrounding the town. But this was not one of the gold mines Bannack was founded for. The structure was newer, made from reinforced concrete, and the heavy steel door was painted with a round insignia that depicted a 5-pointed star rising above the continental United States. Underneath the insignia were the faded words, "Warning, restricted area, U.S. Army installation. Do not enter without written permission from the Director, Bureau of Strategic Emergency Command. Posted by Executive Order of John Kennedy, President of the United States, October 3rd, 1962. The man pushed the door open. Inside, he found a well-lit and well-maintained corridor that led deeper into the mine. Along the walls were more warning signs, these even more foreboding than the first. Danger. Element 115 is highly unstable, one sign read. Radiation protection required beyond this point. Ignoring all of these, the man pressed on, moving quickly down the corridor until he came to a reinforced steel door. He slid a keycard into the slot, where a green light illuminated before the door opened on its own. A computerized voice said, "Welcome back, Inez Espinosa." Professor Espinosa stepped into the next chamber. It was an underground research facility, fully staffed with dozens of workers and furnished with the latest in modern technology. The facility itself was carved right into the walls of what had once been an Illyrium mine. A researcher waved in greeting to the professor and asked why he was making an unexpected appearance. "Where's my wife?" Professor Espinosa spoke in a way that suggested he was not here to show his spouse any affection. Sensing the rising anger in the professor's voice, the researcher replied, "She's in surgery room number 15. You should know." But the professor didn't wait. He took off at a run towards the hallway on his left. Soon, he was in the experimental surgery section of the facility. Doctors and scientists, dressed up in medical scrubs, moved from one operating theater to the next, while other researchers sequestered themselves in decontamination chambers. Someone tried to stop Professor Espinosa and make him put on gloves and a mask, but he shoved them aside and shouted, "Scarlett! You need to stop this! Right now!" He found the door labeled with the number 15 and forced it open, causing the people inside to cry out in surprise. A surgeon pointed to one of his assistants and barked an order, "Sedate her, quickly!" In the middle of the operating theater was a small child, dressed in a hospital gown. She was sitting upright in a chair, surrounded by complex devices and machinery. A sterile sheet was draped over the back of her head, while leather straps were bound around the little girl's chest, arms, and legs, keeping her immobile. On the surgeon's command, another man injected the girl's arm with a syringe. The child took a deep breath and closed her eyes before passing out. Seeing this caused Emmanuel a lot of distress. He balled up his fists and stepped into the operating theater, where he was immediately confronted by a nurse. Sir, you can't come in here. You're not clean." "Good," Emmanuel replied. "This procedure needs to be stopped." The professor shoved the nurse out of the way and began to menacingly approach the lead surgeon, who raised his hands and said, "Wait, Professor, we haven't started yet." "Then release her now." At the same time, an alarm was raised. 2 security guards entered the room behind the professor, armed with stun batons. Moving quickly, Emmanuel reached into his coat, drew a Gauss pistol, and took aim at the guards, who withdrew a few paces. "Back up," Emmanuel shouted. "This atrocity will not continue, and I'll wipe out anyone who tries to stop me." Behind him, the alarmed medical staff quickly undid the straps and pulled the unconscious girl out of the chair. Her long black hair fell down to her waist like a cape. With one hand, the professor grabbed the unconscious girl and pulled her up until she was draped over his shoulders. Keeping his pistol hand raised, Emmanuel started to depart the same way he came in, but he didn't get very far. Behind him, a doorway on the far side of the operating theater swung open and 3 people stormed into the room. Rafi Bakir, an Arab man, wore a military uniform and was brandishing a laser rifle. David Sepulveda, a Mexican-American, wore a crisp black suit and tie with matching sunglasses. Finally, following them into the room was Scarlett Freeman herself. The professor's wife was also dressed in business attire, but unlike her comrades, she was unarmed. Scarlett took one look around the scene before locking eyes with her husband. Like the girl draped over her shoulders, Scarlett also had long black hair. "What the hell is the meaning of all this?" she demanded. "What are you doing? Put her down!" "No," Emmanuel spoke in a voice full of contempt. "You've tormented this child and others like her for far too long. I'm putting an end to all of this." The professor kept his weapon aimed towards Rafi Bakir, but his gaze never left Scarlett's face. Her expression softened, and she tried to put on a forgiving tone of voice. "My love, maybe you don't fully understand the work we're doing here. Perhaps—" "Oh, shut up!" the professor spat at his wife. "Don't you get it? I'm doing this because I do understand. You're gonna finish what the old regime started 50 years ago, and I'm gonna spare humanity the anguish of reliving a nightmare that should have been forgotten." Emmanuel turned to aim his pistol directly at Scarlett's heart. Rafi and David both raised their weapons, but Scarlett waved them off. She returned her husband's cold stare and deftly replied, "Shoot me and you'll set humanity back 50 years, but you won't stop it. Put down the gun, my love. All will be forgiven." Emmanuel cocked the hammer. "You lost the right to call me love a long time ago, monster." The Gauss pistol went off with the sound of a cannon. The metal slug crossed the distance between husband and wife with hypersonic speed, and then it raced back the way it came with equal power. Before he could even comprehend what happened, Professor Espinosa was shot with his own bullet. He collapsed to the floor, dropping both his weapon and the girl, while blood dripped from a wound in his lower abdomen. Racked in pain and agony, Emmanuel was barely aware of 2 sets of hands grabbing him and lifting him into the air. After a short but painful journey, the professor was literally thrown out the laboratory entrance and back into Montana wilderness. Coming to rest on his face, the professor rose to his knees and looked up at the trio who had just ejected him. Scarlett, Rafi, and David all gave him looks of genuine disdain. Clutching his wound, Emmanuel spit at them. "You won't get away with this," he seethed. "Oh, please," Scarlett scoffed. "I already have. You've seen it for yourself. The government and the military, everyone's in my corner now." "I don't mean them," Emmanuel raged. "Mortal men could judge you however they want. But when she learns what you've done..." Emmanuel rose to his feet. He had found new strength as he prepared to invoke the name of the Savior. It was like her power gave Emmanuel the last ounce of willpower he needed to see this through. He pointed to his wife with one bloody hand and cried out for all of the dark world to hear, "The hand of Jericho will be heavy upon you! She will rise up and smite you!" "Then I'll start the smiting!" Scarlett shrieked. She grabbed for the weapon in Rafi's hand, and at the same moment, Emmanuel turned and fled. Behind him, the chatter of machine gun fire was accompanied by the frightening thuds, pops, and snaps of bullets sailing over his head. Clutching his bloody wound, Emmanuel staggered away from the scene and into the darkness. With a great roar of engines, the space plane he arrived on flew low over the ground, raking the landscape with its floodlights and opening up its boarding ramp. Both of Scarlett's companions gestured to the spacecraft, but she shook her head. "Don't worry about him. Let him go," she said. "Before too long, he'll be beneath us. They're all going to be beneath us."